The small town of Millfield wasn't known for much. A single main street lined with family-owned shops, a church with a bell that rang 10 minutes slow, and neighbors who still brought casseroles when someone caught a cold. Among these ordinary streets lived Eleanor Winters, though most folks just called her Miss Ellie. At 68, Eleanor had settled into the kind of quiet life that makes people almost invisible. Her gray hair was always neatly pinned back, her clothes modest and practical. She lived alone in the White House at the end of Maple Street, the one with the perfect little garden out front and lace curtains that were always drawn by sunset. "Good morning, Miss Ellie," called Mrs. Chen from the bakery as Eleanor passed by on her Tuesday walk to the library. "Lovely day, isn't it?" Eleanor nodded with a small smile. "Quite lovely. Those cinnamon rolls smell wonderful. You should take one. My Thomas says sweet things keep the spirit young." Eleanor shook her head politely. "Perhaps next time." This was how most of Eleanor's conversations went, brief, pleasant, and revealing nothing. The townspeople knew little about her beyond her predictable routines and impeccable manners. She was simply the old maid who taught literature at the high school until retirement, who now volunteered at the library twice a week, and who never missed Sunday service. What no one knew, what Eleanor herself tried to forget, was that those hands that now shelved books and tended to roses had once created magic. Back in her small living room, surrounded by books and the ticking of an antique clock that had belonged to her mother, Eleanor's gaze occasionally drifted to the empty corner where a piano might have stood. In these unguarded moments, her fingers would sometimes twitch, as if remembering. She had been just 6 when her mother first placed her hands on piano keys. "Like this, Ellie," her mother had said, guiding tiny fingers over the ivory. "Listen to how beautiful that sounds," and it was beautiful. Even at that young age, Eleanor felt something spark inside her when she played. By 8, she was performing Bach at school recitals. By 12, she was playing Chopin pieces that made her piano teacher weep. By 16, she had filled notebooks with her own compositions and dreamed of music schools and concert halls. "You have a gift, Eleanor," her teacher, Mrs. Blackwood, had told her. A rare and precious gift. Eleanor's mother had believed it too. Each evening after dinner, she would sit in the armchair by the piano, knitting and smiling as Eleanor played. Those had been the happiest hours of their lives. But then came that terrible winter when Eleanor was 19. Her father had always viewed her music as a pleasant hobby, something to make her more accomplished, more marriageable. He'd indulged it because it made his wife happy. But when talk of music school came up, when Eleanor spoke of moving to the city, of performing professionally, his indulgence hardened into opposition. "No daughter of mine will live like some bohemian. Playing in theaters," he'd declared over dinner one night. "It's time to be practical, Eleanor. Music doesn't put food on the table." Eleanor's mother had tried to intervene. "But she has such talent, Robert." "Surely, talent doesn't matter," he'd cut her off. "Respectability does. She can teach piano here in town if she must, but this nonsense about concerts ends now." The argument that followed was the worst they'd ever had. Eleanor had stormed out into the snow, walking for hours, composing furious melodies in her head. By the time she returned home, half frozen and still angry, the house was ablaze with lights and filled with neighbors. Her mother had suffered a heart attack shortly after she'd left. By the time Eleanor made it to the hospital, she was gone. In the dark days that followed, her father's grief twisted into something cruel. "This is what comes of your selfishness," he told her, his voice flat and cold. "Your mother upset herself defending your foolish dreams. If you had been sensible, accepted your place, she would still be here." Eleanor knew it wasn't true. The doctor had explained that her mother had an undiagnosed heart condition. But in her own grief and guilt, the accusation found fertile ground. When her father forbade music in the house, when he sold her piano while she was at her aunt's, when he made her promise never to pursue music again, she agreed to it all. It felt like penance. "Promise me, Eleanor," he'd demanded on his own deathbed 10 years later. "Promise me you'll honor your mother's memory by living the respectable life she would have wanted for you." Eleanor had promised, though she knew deep down her mother would have wanted her music to continue. But by then she had already become Miss Ellie, the quiet teacher who flinched at the sound of piano music and who left the room during the musical portion of church services. For nearly 50 years, she had kept that promise. She had built a life around the absence of music, filling the silence with books and garden work and the polite conversation of a small town. If sometimes she woke from dreams where her fingers danced across keys, if sometimes she hummed melodies she'd never written down, well, no one needed to know. On this particular Tuesday, as Eleanor made her way back from the library with 3 new mystery novels tucked in her bag, something unusual caught her eye. A bright blue poster taped to the community bulletin board outside the post office. Millfield Annual Cultural Festival this year's. Theme: The Glory of Classical Music featuring renowned pianist James Harrington Town Hall, Saturday. Mall welcome. Eleanor stopped, her heart suddenly beating too fast. She hadn't known about this. How had she missed hearing about it? She always made a point to avoid the few musical events that came through Millfield. As she stood there, staring at the poster with its image of a gleaming grand piano, a voice startled her. Isn't it exciting? We've never had anyone so famous visit before. Eleanor turned to see Beth Wheeler, the town's librarian and one of the few people Eleanor might consider a friend. I didn't realize there was a festival, Eleanor managed to say. Beth looked surprised. Oh my, it's been in the town newsletter for months. The committee's been working so hard. Poor Lisa's been running herself ragged organizing everything. She peered at Eleanor more closely. Are you feeling all right? You've gone quite pale. Eleanor forced a smile. Just a bit tired. These books are heavier than they look. But as she continued her walk home, the image of that piano stayed with her. For the first time in decades, Eleanor felt the old longing rise up, impossible to ignore. At home, she set her books down on the kitchen table but didn't open them. Instead, she found herself walking to the small desk in her bedroom, where she kept her personal papers. From the bottom drawer beneath tax documents and her will, she pulled out a faded photograph. In it, a young woman with dark hair sat at a grand piano, her face bright with joy, her hands poised above the keys. Eleanor barely recognized herself in that girl anymore. She ran her fingertips over the image, remembering how it felt. The cool smoothness of the keys, the perfect resistance as they gave way under pressure, the vibration of sound that seemed to travel up her arms and into her heart. 50 years, she whispered to the empty room. 50 years of silence. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Melodies she hadn't allowed herself to remember filled her head, demanding attention. She got up and paced her small house, stopping at windows to look out at the quiet town where nothing ever changed, where she had buried herself alive all these years. In the kitchen, she put the kettle on for tea and noticed her hands were trembling. Not just the usual tremor of age, but something else, anticipation perhaps, or fear. The promise she'd made had shaped her entire adult life. Breaking it now, even thinking of breaking it, felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Yet for the first time, Eleanor wondered what might happen if she jumped. I'm an old woman now, she told herself as she sipped her tea. What difference could it possibly make? But even as she said it, she knew it would make all the difference in the world. To her, at least. The question was whether she had the courage to find out how much. As dawn broke over Millfield, Eleanor made a decision. She wouldn't perform, that would be too much too soon. But perhaps she could attend the festival. Perhaps she could listen after all these years, and see if music still had the power to move her. Or perhaps, whispered a daring voice inside her that sounded surprisingly like her 19-year-old self. Perhaps there might be a moment, just a moment, when she could touch those keys again. Eleanor went to her closet and pulled out the blue dress she saved for special occasions. Holding it against herself, she looked in the mirror and saw not just Miss Ellie, the old maid of Millfield, but a glimpse of Eleanor Winters, the girl who once made music that could break your heart. Well, she said to her reflection, I suppose we'll see. The morning of the festival arrived with unexpected sunshine after a week of gray skies. Eleanor woke early, her sleep having been restless and filled with half-remembered melodies. She went about her morning routine with unusual care, washing her hair with the lavender shampoo she saved for special occasions, ironing her blue dress until not a wrinkle remained, and even applying a touch of lipstick she'd had in her drawer for years. You're being silly, she told her reflection. It's just a concert, but they both knew it wasn't just anything, not to her. The festival wasn't scheduled to begin until 7 that evening, leaving Eleanor with a full day to fill, or to endure, depending on how she looked at it. She tried to read one of her new mystery novels, but found herself reading the same paragraph over and over. the words refusing to stick in her mind. By noon, she'd given up on reading and decided a walk might settle her nerves. The spring air was crisp but pleasant as she made her way down Maple Street toward the town center. Millfield looked different somehow, touched by the excitement of the coming event. Volunteers hung colorful banners across Main Street and the shops had special displays in their windows. "Miss Ellie," called a voice, and Eleanor turned to see Ted from the hardware store waving from his ladder. "You coming to the big show tonight?" "Whole town's gonna be there!" Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. It seemed everyone was talking about the festival. As she continued her walk, she overheard snippets of conversation all centered on the famous pianist who would be performing. "They say he's played at Carnegie. Halty, studied in Vienna with the greatest. Masters. Tickets sold out in 3 days flat." Each comment made Eleanor's stomach tighten with a mix of anticipation and dread. What would it be like to hear truly great playing after all these years? Would it reawaken her old passion or simply confirm what she had lost? Without really planning to, Eleanor found herself walking toward the town hall. The imposing brick building stood at the center of Millfield, hosting everything from town meetings to holiday pageants. Today, its double doors stood open as people carried in equipment and flowers for the evening's event. Eleanor hesitated at the bottom of the steps. She had no reason to go inside. No role to play in the preparations. And yet, "Excuse me," called a harried voice. "Could you grab that door, please?" A young woman struggled down the steps, arms full of what looked like programs for the evening. Without thinking, Eleanor hurried up to hold the door for her. "Thanks so much," the woman said, blowing a strand of copper hair from her face. "I'm Lisa, by the way. Festival coordinator, though that's starting to feel like a fancy term for person who runs around putting out fires." Eleanor smiled despite herself. "I'm Eleanor. Can I help you with those?" Lisa looked surprised and relieved. "Actually, yes. That would be wonderful." And just like that, Eleanor found herself following Lisa back into the town hall, arms soon filled with programs that needed to be placed on seats. The large meeting room had been transformed into a concert hall. Rows of chairs faced a small stage where technicians fussed over lighting. And there, at the center of the stage, stood a grand piano. Eleanor froze, staring at it. Even from across the room, she could see it was magnificent, far finer than the upright she'd played as a girl, or even the baby grand at her high school. This was a true concert piano, its black surface gleaming under the lights like a dark pool. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Lisa said, noticing her gaze. "It was delivered yesterday from the city. Cost a fortune to rent, but the council agreed we needed something special for Mr. Harrington." Eleanor nodded, unable to look away from the instrument. "Yes, very special. Do you play?" Lisa asked casually as they began placing programs on chairs. The question, so innocent, hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Does she play? Did she play? Had she ever really played, or had it just been a girl's dream long ago abandoned? "I used to," she finally said, the words feeling strange in her mouth after so many years of denial. "Oh?" Lisa's interest perked up. "Like lessons as a kid?" Eleanor hesitated. How much to say? How much to reveal of that buried part of herself? "Something like that," she said softly. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Eleanor grateful that Lisa didn't press further. The young woman clearly had 1,000 things on her mind, checking her watch every few minutes and occasionally darting off to solve some new crisis. During one such absence, Eleanor found herself alone in the row nearest the stage. The piano sat just a few feet away, lid closed, waiting. Without conscious thought, she drifted closer until she stood beside it. Her fingers hovered over the surface, not quite touching. What would it feel like after all these years? Would the keys respond to her touch? Or had her hands forgotten everything they once knew? "It's unlocked," came Lisa's voice from behind her, making Eleanor jump guiltily. "If you want to try it." "Oh. No, I couldn't possibly." Eleanor stepped back, hands clutched together like misbehaving children. Lisa shrugged. "Why not? Mr. Harrington won't be here for sound check until 5 and the tuner already finished. Someone might as well enjoy it." Eleanor shook her head, feeling panic rise in her throat. "No, really. It's been far too long." Lisa studied her for a moment, head tilted. "You know, my grandmother used to play. She always said music isn't something you forget. It just waits inside you." She glanced at her watch again and sighed. "I've got to check on the catering. But seriously, no one would mind. Sometimes these fancy pianos need to be played by someone who will appreciate them, not just show off on them. With that, she hurried off again, leaving Eleanor alone with the instrument and a choice she never thought she'd face. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted the lid. The keys gleamed up at her, perfect white and black, an invitation and a challenge. Eleanor glanced around the empty hall. No one was watching. No one would know her father was long dead. Her promise had been kept for half a century. Surely just once. Eleanor sat on the bench, her back automatically straightening into the proper posture. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. What should she play? The question seemed enormous, as if this one choice might sum up all she had lost, all she might still find. In the end, her fingers decided for her. They fell gently onto the keys, finding a simple C major scale, the first thing her mother had taught her. The notes rang out, clear and perfect. Eleanor gasped softly at the sound, at the feeling of the keys giving way beneath her touch. Up and down one octave, then two. Her fingers remembered. They knew the way. Emboldened, she tried a simple melody. For Elise, the piece every piano student learns. Her hands moved tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as muscle, memory took over. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice Lisa had returned until the young woman spoke. "That's lovely," she said, softly. Eleanor's hands jerked away from the keys as if burned. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No, please," Lisa said quickly. "Don't stop on my account. It sounded wonderful." Eleanor shook her head, rising from the bench. "It was nothing. Just an old beginner's piece." "Well, it sounded pretty good to me." Lisa hesitated, then continued in a rush. "Actually, I might have a huge favor to ask. Our opening act canceled this morning. Local high school student with a bad case of stage fright. We have this gap now before Mr. Harrington, and I've been scrambling to fill it." Eleanor felt her heart begin to race. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly. Just a short piece," Lisa pressed. 5 minutes, that's all. Something simple like what you were just playing. The audience will be settling in, most won't even be paying close attention. I haven't performed in—" Eleanor stopped herself. She had nearly said 50 years. "In a very long time." Lisa looked at her with pleading eyes. "Please, you'd be saving me. The mayor's already complained about the program change, and I promised I'd find a replacement." Eleanor looked back at the piano, feeling pulled in two directions. The thought of playing in public, of breaking her long silence so completely, terrified her. But another part, a part she'd suppressed for decades, thrilled at the possibility. "Just 5 minutes?" she asked softly. "Just 5, Lisa confirmed eagerly. "You don't even have to use your full name in the program if you don't want to. I can list you as, I don't know, E. Winters or something." Eleanor took a deep breath. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask," Lisa said, breaking into a smile. "The festival starts at 7. If you decide yes, come backstage at 6:30. She glanced at her watch again and groaned. "I've got to run. Those flowers for the reception are apparently causing someone's allergies to explode." As Lisa dashed off, Eleanor turned back to the piano. Her hands were shaking, but not from age, from possibility. She closed the lid gently and stepped away. She had a decision to make. Perhaps the most important one since that snowy night 50 years ago, when she'd made a promise she never thought she'd break. As she walked home through the golden afternoon light, the notes of long-forgotten melodies swirled around her like autumn leaves, waiting to be gathered up again. Back in her quiet house, Eleanor paced from room to room, too restless to settle. The clock on her mantel seemed to tick louder than usual, counting down the hours until she would have to decide. Play or don't play. Break her promise or keep it. She tried to imagine what her father would say if he could see her now, contemplating this rebellion after all these years. His disapproving face rose in her memory, but for the first time it didn't feel quite so powerful. "I kept my word for 50 years, she whispered to the empty room. "Isn't that enough?" Eleanor went to her bedroom and opened her closet, pushing aside everyday clothes to reach the back. There, in a garment bag she rarely touched, hung her mother's dress. A simple black gown with a touch of lace at the collar, the dress her mother had worn to Eleanor's biggest recital, the last one before everything changed. She laid it carefully on the bed, surprised to find her eyes filling with tears. What would her mother say about all this? About the years of silence, the buried talent, the promise extracted from grief, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting on the soft fabric of the dress. "I miss you," she said softly. "I've always wondered if I did the right thing." The house remained quiet, offering no answers. But as she sat there, Eleanor found herself remembering not her father's stern commands, but her mother's joyful face as she listened to Eleanor play. The memory was so clear she could almost hear her mother's voice. "Play from your heart, Ellie. That's where the real music lives." Eleanor stood suddenly and went to her desk. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out not just the photograph this time, but a small, worn notebook filled with handwritten music, compositions she'd created as a teenager, pieces she'd been working on when everything stopped. The pages were yellow with age, the ink faded, but the notes still danced across the staff, waiting. Eleanor hummed a few bars of one piece, surprised at how readily the melody came back to her. She'd called it Summer Rain, inspired by watching storms move across the valley from her bedroom window. She'd never heard it played. Not once, the thought struck her with unexpected force. This music, her music, had never actually existed in the world. It had been silenced before it ever had a chance to be heard. Something shifted inside Eleanor then, a quiet but seismic change. She'd been asking herself the wrong question. It wasn't about breaking a promise to her father. It was about keeping a promise to herself, to the girl she had been, to the music that had lived inside her all these years. Eleanor looked at the clock. Just past 5. The festival would begin in 2 hours. Moving with sudden purpose, she went to the bathroom and washed her face, erasing the traces of tears. She brushed her hair until it shone silver in the light, then pinned it up in a simple but elegant style. Her hands, she noticed, were steady now. She slipped on her mother's dress, which fit as if it had been waiting for this moment. From her jewelry box, she took out the small pearl earrings that had been her graduation gift. "There," she said to her reflection. "That will do." Eleanor wrapped her notebook carefully in tissue paper and placed it in her handbag. She might not need it. She'd play something simple, as Lisa had suggested, but it felt right to bring it along. This piece of her past reaching into her future. The walk to the town hall took her past neighbors who did double takes at her formal appearance. "Going to the concert, Miss Ellie?" called Mrs. Chen from her porch. Eleanor nodded, not trusting herself to explain more. How could she put into words what she barely understood herself? The town hall was transformed when she arrived. Twinkling lights adorned the entrance and people in their finest clothes streamed through the doors, programs in hand. Eleanor bypassed the main entrance, remembering Lisa's instructions to come backstage if she decided to play. The side door was propped open, revealing a bustle of activity as volunteers arranged flowers and checked microphones. Eleanor hesitated in the doorway, suddenly overwhelmed. What was she thinking? She couldn't do this. She was just an old woman who used to play long ago. "Miss Winters, you came." Lisa appeared at her elbow, looking harried but delighted. Her copper hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple black dress that made her look older and more official. "I was hoping you would." Eleanor clutched her handbag tighter. I'm not sure I can." "You absolutely can," Lisa said firmly. "Come with me." She led Eleanor through the backstage area to a small room with a mirror and a chair. "You can wait here until it's time. The program starts with the mayor's welcome speech, which will take at least 10 minutes. He loves to talk. Then I'll introduce you." She paused, studying Eleanor's face. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" "No," Eleanor wanted to say. "I'm terrified. I haven't played in public for half a century." I made a promise, but what came out was, "Yes, I'm sure." Lisa squeezed her hand. "You'll be wonderful. I can tell." She glanced at her watch. "I need to check on a few things. I'll come get you when it's time." Alone in the small room, Eleanor took deep breaths. She could hear the muffled sounds of the audience arriving, the buzz of conversation, occasional laughter. Real people who had come to hear real music. "What am I doing?" she whispered. From her handbag, she took out her old notebook and opened it to Summer Rain. The notes looked back at her, patient after all these years. Eleanor closed her eyes and played the piece in her mind, her fingers twitching slightly with phantom movements. Could she really do this? Play not just for herself, but for a hall full of strangers? Play something she'd written herself? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Winters?" "The mayor's about to finish." Lisa peeked in, her face flushed with excitement. "Are you ready?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "Almost." What will you be playing? I need to announce something. Eleanor looked down at her notebook, then back at Lisa. A piece called Summer Rain. I wrote it. A long time ago. Lisa's eyes widened. You wrote it? That's amazing. I'll be sure to mention that. Before Eleanor could protest, Lisa was gone again, leaving her with the realization that she'd just committed to playing her own composition. Not for Elise or a simple scale, but her own music. Music no one had ever heard before. The mayor's voice boomed to a conclusion, followed by applause. Then Lisa's voice, clear and professional, began introducing the evening's program. A special addition to our program tonight. Before our main performer, we're honored to present a local pianist who will be sharing an original composition with us. Please welcome Eleanor Winters playing her own piece, Summer Rain. More applause, expectant and polite. And then Lisa was at the door again, gesturing for Eleanor to follow. The walk to the stage felt endless. Eleanor was acutely aware of every eye turning to watch her. The slight murmur of surprise at seeing the town's quiet librarian volunteer mount the steps to the grand piano. She didn't look at the audience, focusing instead on the gleaming instrument waiting for her. As she sat on the bench, adjusting its height with hands that trembled only slightly, Eleanor caught sight of Beth from the library in the front row, her mouth a perfect O of surprise. Next to her sat Mrs. Chen, beaming with unexpected delight. Eleanor placed her notebook on the piano, opening it to the right page. Then she straightened her back, positioned her hands over the keys, and took one final deep breath. For a moment, the whole world seemed to pause. 50 years of silence stretched between the girl who had written this music and the woman who would now finally play it. Then Eleanor's fingers touched the keys, and the first notes of Summer Rain filled the hall. The piece began softly, like the first drops of a summer shower, tentative, gentle. Her fingers moved slowly at first, finding their way. A few notes weren't quite right, a rhythm slightly off. But then, like a body remembering how to dance, her hands found their confidence. The melody built, gathering strength like a growing storm. Eleanor's fingers moved faster, more surely, drawing sounds from the piano that seemed to rise and swirl around the hushed room. This was rain on warm earth, on dusty leaves, on parched ground grateful for water. Eleanor forgot about the audience, forgot about her fear, forgot about everything except the music flowing through her. Her body swayed slightly as she played, the way it had when she was young, as if the music were moving through her physically. The piece reached its crescendo, the fullness of the storm, passionate and powerful, before gradually subsiding into a gentle conclusion, like clouds parting to reveal sun-washed fields. As the final notes faded, Eleanor remained still, hands hovering over the keys, eyes closed. She didn't want to break the spell, didn't want to return to the world just yet. Then the silence was broken by a single pair of hands clapping, then another, and suddenly the whole hall erupted in applause, much louder than she had expected, with a few people even rising to their feet. Eleanor opened her eyes, blinking in surprise. She hadn't played perfectly, far from it. There had been hesitations, small mistakes. But the audience was clapping as if she'd given them something precious, and perhaps she had. Not perfect music, but honest music. Music that had waited 50 years to be heard. As she rose on slightly shaky legs to acknowledge the applause with a small bow, Eleanor caught sight of Lisa standing in the wings, giving her a thumbs up and a wide smile. For the first time in decades, Eleanor felt truly visible. Not as Miss Ellie, the old maid who kept to herself, but as Eleanor Winters, the pianist who had finally broken her silence. Eleanor walked off the stage in a daze, the applause still ringing in her ears. Her heart hammered in her chest and her fingers tingled with the memory of the keys. Had she really just done that? Had she really just played her own music in public after all these years? Lisa met her in the wings, eyes shining. That was beautiful, she whispered, squeezing Eleanor's arm. Absolutely beautiful. I had no idea you could play like that. Eleanor opened her mouth to respond, but found she couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She simply nodded, clutching her notebook to her chest like a shield. Mr. Harrington will be on in about 15 minutes, Lisa continued, guiding Eleanor toward the small waiting room. You're welcome to watch from backstage, or there's a reserved seat for you in the front row. Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I think I'd like to sit down, she managed to say. The emotional weight of what she'd just done was crashing over her in waves. In the audience, please. Lisa nodded understandingly. Of course. Let me show you to your seat. As they made their way through the backstage area, a tall man in a tuxedo stepped out of another waiting room. Eleanor recognized him immediately from the posters. James Harrington, the famous pianist, the evening's main attraction. He nodded politely as they passed, then paused, his attention caught by the notebook in Eleanor's hands. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the hint of an accent Eleanor couldn't quite place. "Were you the woman who just played? The original piece?" Eleanor felt her cheeks flush. "Yes, it was nothing, really." "It was not nothing," he interrupted gently. "It was quite remarkable, very honest, may I?" He gestured to her notebook. Before Eleanor could decide how to respond, he continued, "I apologize for being forward. Professional curiosity. We musicians are always hungry for new music, you know." He smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I'm James." "Eleanor," she replied, finding her voice. "Eleanor Winters." "Eleanor," he repeated as if testing the name. "Your composition had a wonderful structure, very classical in form, but the emotion was, how do I say it? Not held back. Very direct. I would be interested to see more of your work someday." Eleanor stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. James Harrington, who had played at Carnegie Hall, who had studied with masters in Vienna, was complimenting her amateur composition? Thank you," she finally said. "That's very kind. Not kind, honest." He glanced at his watch. I must prepare now, but perhaps we can speak later, after the performance?" Eleanor nodded, still stunned. "Yes, I'd like that." Lisa, who had been watching this exchange with wide eyes, gently guided Eleanor toward the auditorium. "That was James Harrington," she whispered unnecessarily. "He never talks to anyone before a performance, never." Eleanor hardly heard her. Her mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what was happening. This evening had already gone so far beyond anything she could have imagined. In the auditorium, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Eleanor slipped into her reserved seat in the front row, nodding shyly at the curious glances from those around her. Beth from the library leaned over from the next seat. "Eleanor Winters," she whispered. "I had no idea you could play like that. Where did you learn? And you wrote that piece yourself? It was gorgeous." Eleanor gave her a small smile. "It's a long story," she said softly. "Perhaps I'll tell you someday." The lights dimmed before Beth could press further, and Lisa stepped onto the stage to introduce James Harrington. The audience's applause was thunderous as he emerged, bowing with practiced grace before taking his seat at the piano. Eleanor watched, mesmerized, as his hands hovered over the keys for a moment of perfect stillness. Then he began to play, and the world seemed to fall away. His technique was flawless, his interpretation of Chopin both technically brilliant and emotionally profound. Eleanor found herself holding her breath during certain passages, tears springing to her eyes at particularly beautiful moments. This was what she had given up. This level of artistry, this communion between musician and audience, this sharing of something transcendent. She had walked away from the possibility of this. And yet, as she watched his fingers dance across the keys, Eleanor felt not jealousy or regret, but a strange sense of kinship. He was speaking a language she understood, one she had almost forgotten she knew. When the final piece ended, the audience erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the walls of the town hall. Eleanor stood with them, clapping until her hands hurt, filled with a joy that was both appreciation for his artistry and something more personal. The joy of reconnection with the world of music she had abandoned so long ago. After 3 curtain calls, the house lights came up, signaling the end of the formal program and the beginning of the reception in the adjoining room. People began filing out, their voices loud with excitement and praise. Eleanor remained in her seat, suddenly uncertain. Should she go to the reception? Would James Harrington remember his invitation to speak with her? It seemed unlikely now in the wake of such a triumphant performance. "Miss Winters?" Lisa appeared at her side. Mr. Harrington asked if you would join him backstage. He was quite insistent. Eleanor blinked in surprise. He was? Lisa nodded, looking impressed. Very. He said to bring your notebook. Heart pounding again. Eleanor followed Lisa back through the side door and down the corridor to a small room where James Harrington was accepting congratulations from what appeared to be local officials. When he saw Eleanor, he politely excused himself and came to greet her. "Ah, Eleanor, you came. Excellent." He gestured to a pair of chairs in the corner. "Shall we sit?" I find I'm quite tired after performing. The energy required, well, you know. And the strange thing was she did know. Even her brief performance had left her drained yet somehow more alive than she'd felt in years. They sat, and James immediately asked to see her notebook. With hesitant hands, Eleanor passed it to him. He opened it carefully as if handling something precious, and began to turn the pages, humming softly to himself as he read through her compositions. "These are quite good," he said after a few minutes, looking up at her with genuine interest. "You have a natural sense of structure, but also freedom within that structure. How long did you study?" Eleanor twisted her hands in her lap. "Not long. Until I was 19, he raised his eyebrows. "And then?" "And then I stopped," she said simply. He waited, clearly expecting more of an explanation, but when she offered none, he nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you obviously have talent. This one, Winter Light, it has echoes of Debussy, but with something uniquely your own. And this one, First Snow, I'd very much like to hear how you would play it." Eleanor stared at him. "You would?" "Yes, indeed." He closed the notebook and handed it back to her. "Tell me, Eleanor Winters, why did a pianist of your caliber become the town's—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Old maid?" Eleanor supplied with a wry smile. He laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "I was going to say hidden treasure, but yes, why hide your gift all these years?" Eleanor looked down at her hands, older now with slight age spots and fine lines, but still strong, still capable. "It's complicated," she said. "Family, expectations, a promise I made." James nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Ah, yes, families and their expectations. I know something about that." He leaned forward. "But you played tonight. You broke that promise?" "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "After 50 years I did." 50 years. He sat back, visibly shocked. "You haven't played for 50 years, and then you come out and play like that? That's extraordinary." Eleanor felt her cheeks grow warm again. "I wasn't very good. I made mistakes." "Of course you made mistakes," he interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. "That's not the point. The point is the music was alive. Do you know how many technically perfect performances I've heard that had no soul? Too many to count." He tapped her notebook. "But this has soul." They were interrupted by Lisa, who came to inform James that the reception was waiting for him. He sighed dramatically. "Duty calls. The price of fame, I'm afraid." He stood, then looked at Eleanor with sudden decision. "I'm giving a master class tomorrow at the community college in the next town over. Just a small group of students. Would you come? Bring your music. Perhaps you could play something else for us." Eleanor's mouth fell open. I couldn't possibly." "You can and you should," he said firmly. 50 years is too long to keep music locked away, don't you think?" He scribbled something on a small card and handed it to her. The address and time. "I hope to see you there, Eleanor Winters." Then he was gone, swept away by his obligations, leaving Eleanor sitting alone with her notebook, a professional pianist's card, and an invitation that would have seemed impossible just hours ago. She ran her fingers over the card, reading the elegant script of his name and the hastily written address beneath it. A master class. With students, young people with their whole musical lives ahead of them. The thought was terrifying. And yet, as Eleanor left the town hall, stepping into the cool evening air, she felt as if she were walking in a dream. The streets of Millfield looked the same shops, the same houses with their porch lights glowing in the darkness. But she was different. She had changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. At her gate, Eleanor paused and looked up at the night sky, stars bright above the sleeping town. Somewhere in that vastness were her parents watching. What would they think of what she had done tonight? For the first time in decades, Eleanor found she didn't particularly care what her father would think. But her mother, she liked to believe her mother would be proud. Eleanor barely slept that night. She lay awake in her neat bedroom, staring at the ceiling as memories and possibilities swirled through her mind. The applause still echoed in her ears. The feeling of the keys beneath her fingers. The look of respect in James Harrington's eyes as he read through her compositions. By dawn, she had made her decision. She dressed carefully in a simple blue skirt and cream blouse, packed her notebook in her handbag, and left a message on Beth's answering machine asking her to feed the cat. Then she caught the morning bus to Riverdale, the next town over, where the community college was located. The campus was small but modern, with red brick buildings and flowering trees just beginning to bloom. Eleanor followed the signs to the music department, her steps slowing as she approached. Through an open window, she could hear a piano, someone practicing scales with meticulous care. The sound pulled her forward like an invisible thread. Inside, the hallway was lined with practice rooms, each containing a piano and a student bent over the keys. Eleanor paused, listening to the overlapping melodies, the starts and stops, the repetition of difficult passages. How familiar it all was, and yet how strange to be here, among young musicians at the beginning of their journeys. She found the room number written on James's card and hesitated outside the door. Inside, she could hear his voice, patient but firm, guiding someone through a piece. No. Listen to what the music is telling you here. This isn't just notes on a page. This is a story. What is it saying? Eleanor took a deep breath and knocked. The room fell silent. Then James called, "Come in." Eleanor opened the door to find a bright studio with large windows overlooking the campus. A grand piano stood in the center with chairs arranged in a semicircle around it. 6 young people sat watching as James stood beside a girl at the piano, his hand resting on the music stand. When he saw Eleanor, his face lit up. "Ah, our guest has arrived." He gestured for her to enter. "Everyone, this is Eleanor Winters, the composer I was telling you about." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm as all eyes turned to her. "I'm not sure I'd call myself a composer." "Nonsense," James said firmly. "You've written music, therefore you're a composer. These are my students for the day." He introduced them quickly. Young people from different backgrounds, all serious about music, all looking at her with curious eyes. "Please, sit," James said, indicating an empty chair. "We were just discussing the importance of emotional honesty in performance. In fact, your playing last night was a perfect example of what I've been trying to explain." He turned to his students. Miss Winters performed her own composition after not touching a piano for 50 years. It wasn't technically perfect, but it was real, authentic. The students' eyes widened, and Eleanor felt a mixture of embarrassment and pride. 50 years. When James said it like that, it sounded impossible. "Now," James continued, turning back to the girl at the piano, "let's try that passage again, but this time, think about what you're trying to say." Eleanor watched as the student began to play again, a complicated piece that Eleanor recognized as Rachmaninoff. Under James's guidance, the girl's playing transformed, becoming more nuanced, more expressive. The morning passed quickly as James worked with each student in turn. Eleanor was fascinated by his teaching style, demanding but kind, pushing each player to look beyond the notes to find the heart of the music. During a short break, James came to sit beside her. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would," Eleanor smiled. "Neither was I. You've been listening to these young players. What do you think?" "They're very talented," she said honestly. "Much better than I ever was." James tilted his head, studying her. "Technical skill isn't everything, as I keep telling them. But tell me, did you never want to go back to it, in all those years?" Eleanor looked down at her hands. "I thought about it. Many times. But the longer I waited, the harder it seemed. And then I was the quiet town librarian, the old maid who kept to herself. It didn't seem possible anymore. And yet here you are." "Yes," she said softly. "Here I am." After the break, James surprised her by asking, "Eleanor, would you be willing to play something for us? Perhaps another of your compositions?" Her first instinct was to refuse. Play for these talented young people with their years of training? It seemed absurd, but then she remembered how it had felt last night, releasing that music into the world after so long. "All right," she said, surprising herself as much as anyone. "I have a piece called First Snow. It's not as polished as Summer Rain, but perfect," James said, gesturing to the piano. Eleanor took her place on the bench, adjusting it slightly, then opened her notebook to the right page. The students watched with undisguised curiosity as this elderly woman, someone their grandparents' age, prepared to play. "I wrote this when I was 17, she explained, after the first snowfall of winter. I was sitting in my bedroom watching the flakes drift down, and this melody came to me." She smiled at the memory. It seemed magical how the world could be transformed so completely in just a few hours. Then she began to play. First Snow was a gentler piece than Summer Rain, with a delicate crystalline quality in the high notes and a steady quiet progression in the left hand, like footsteps in new snow. Eleanor played with more confidence than the night before, her fingers remembering their way more readily now. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment before the students burst into applause. "That was beautiful," said one young man with earnest eyes. "It really sounded like snow falling." "The counter melody in the middle section was lovely," added another student. "Very inventive," James was smiling broadly. "What did I tell you? Emotional honesty. That's what makes a performance memorable." He turned to Eleanor. "Thank you for sharing that with us." The rest of the master class passed in a blur of music and conversation. Eleanor found herself drawn into discussions about composition techniques, about how to translate feelings into notes, about the balance between technical skill and emotional expression. When the session ended, the students gathered their things and said their goodbyes, several pausing to thank Eleanor personally for her insights. She watched them go, these young musicians with their whole lives ahead of them, and felt a curious mixture of joy and wistfulness. James sat down beside her again as the room emptied. "So," he said, "what now, Eleanor Winters?" She looked at him puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've broken your 50-year silence. You've played not once but twice. You've shared your compositions with the world. Well, with a small part of it anyway. What happens next?" Eleanor hadn't thought beyond today. The idea that there could be a next hadn't really occurred to her. "I don't know," she admitted. James nodded thoughtfully. "I have a suggestion if you're open to it." He leaned forward, suddenly serious. "I am putting together a collection of American piano compositions for publication. Unknown or little-known works that deserve wider recognition. I'd like to include Summer Rain and First Snow." Eleanor stared at him. "You can't be serious." "I'm perfectly serious. They're good pieces, Eleanor, different from anything else in the collection. Fresh, despite being written decades ago." He smiled at her astonishment. "Would you allow it?" Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course. Excellent. And there's one more thing." He hesitated, then continued. "The community college is looking for a part-time piano teacher, someone to work with beginners, nothing too demanding. I don't suppose you'd be interested." Eleanor felt as if the room were spinning slightly. "Me, teach piano? But I'm not qualified." "You have 60 years of musical knowledge in your head and heart," James interrupted gently. "That's qualification enough for beginners. Think about it at least." On the bus ride home, Eleanor did think about it. She thought about what it would mean to step so completely out of the quiet life she had built, to become not just Eleanor who played the piano once, but Eleanor the pianist, the composer, the teacher. It was terrifying. And thrilling. As the bus pulled into Millfield, Eleanor noticed people looking at her differently. Word of her performance had spread, it seemed. Mrs. Chen waved enthusiastically from the bakery door. Ted from the hardware store gave her a thumbs up. Even teenagers she didn't know nodded in recognition as she passed. At her gate, Beth was waiting, holding Eleanor's cat and practically bursting with questions. "There you are. I've been so worried." "Where have you been? Everyone's talking about your performance last night. The paper wants to interview you, did you know? And Lisa called twice asking if you'd consider playing at the Christmas festival." "What's going on, Eleanor?" Eleanor looked at her friend's excited face and found herself laughing. A free, joyful sound she barely recognized as her own. "Everything's going on. Beth," she said, taking her cat and leading the way to her front door. "Everything is finally going on." Inside, Eleanor set her cat down and went straight to the empty corner of her living room. The corner that had waited. "Like her music for 50 years, I think," she said, more to herself than to Beth. "It's time to buy a piano." Later that evening, after Beth had finally gone home, still buzzing with the news she would spread through town, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and her notebook open before her. The blank pages at the back seemed to beckon to her. She picked up a pencil and began to write a new piece. This one would be called Second Chances. As the melody took shape in her mind, Eleanor smiled. She was 68 years old and her life was just beginning.